please explain in detail about the Romani people and why they are marginalized even today. That is a very good question and an important question. So some of you may have seen that I have discussed this on Ranveer Allahbadia's channel about the Romani people, who they are. So let me first clear a very popular misconception. These are not the Romanian people, these are the Romani people. The Romanian people are not Romani, but some Romani people are Romanian because they live in Romania. So there is a difference. Romani, Romanian, it is not the same. It is very different. The Romani people are originally Indians. So let me tell you the story, how this happened and what it's all about. So about 1200 years ago or so, we had these waves of Turkic and Arabic invasions into India, mostly Turkic. So these Turks, they kept on trying to push into India. They were defeated repeatedly for several centuries, but eventually they were able to succeed, as we know very well. So what happened is that these guys who came from Central Asia, they would come into India, they would do terrible things, right? And they would take back hundreds of thousands of Indian men, women, and children as slaves. All right. So there were lots of slaves. Many of them died in the mountains, the so-called Hindu Kush mountains. Kush means to kill. Hindu Kush means to kill Hindus. So these mountains were Hindu killers because they were so cold, and Indians were accustomed to warmer climates. So they killed. I don't even know how many Indians were killed there, but it gave these mountains the name of Hindu Kush. So these Indians were taken by the tens or hundreds of thousands as slaves into the Turkic and Islamic world. Even today, the people of Yemen look like Indians. If you were to notice that, a lot of Arabs look like Indians. There is a reason for that. And many Central Asian people also look like Indians, if you look carefully. So this is the consequence of the slaves that were forcibly taken out of India. Now, many of these people were artisans, musicians, etc. So what probably happened was that they took too many slaves out of India, and eventually they did not know what to do with them, and they did not want to massacre these people in their own country. And therefore, I think what happened, this is speculation, we don't have proof, but this is the most likely reason of what happened, the most likely story of what happened. So what most likely happened is that these slaves were ordered to go west and leave the country of the wherever they were enslaved, and they were prohibited from going back eastwards into India. And so this story began of these Indian origin people wandering across Europe for centuries. So these people, they speak an Indo-Aryan language. The language they speak is most closely related to Gujarati and Rajasthani and Punjabi. It is most likely closest to Gujarati, modern day Gujarati. And they look like Indians, many of them. All right, the Romani. So they are popularly known as the gypsies in Europe, and they are very badly marginalized. Their history is full of tragedy and slavery, and often lots of massacres and genocide. So they have always been treated as outsiders in Europe. They have never been allowed to settle down. They keep wandering. They live a nomadic existence. In the past centuries, many of them were enslaved. Many of them were put to death just for being of a different ethnicity, right? And this persecution and marginalization continues today. So even today, people are afraid to admit that they have Romani ancestry. And yet, so many of the most talented people in Europe, in all kinds of spheres and professions, many of the most talented people in Europe are actually Romani. Let me give you some examples. Charlie Chaplin was Romani. Pablo Picasso was Romani. Eric Cantona, the great French footballer, was Romani. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, the Serbian, and no, I think he's Swedish. He's Swedish now. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is Romani. Robert Plant, the great singer of Led Zeppelin, is Romani. Elvis Presley was Romani. I could give you 1,000 more examples. Some of the greatest entertainers and sports people of all time are of Romani origin, right? So even though they have been persecuted and they have suffered so much, they are still they are culturally still such a big force. The national music of Spain, flamenco, is a Romani creation. The Romani, it's a Romani form of music. Flamenco dance is Romani, and flamenco dance is very similar to Kathak if you were to examine its morphology, right? And its dynamics. So the Romani people have been persecuted for centuries. They are of Indian origin. Many of them still look Indian, right? And many of them are stateless even today. They are not given official documentation. They don't have passports, so they go from country to country, state to state to state. They live as nomads. They have to live on the outskirts of cities in their wagons and carts. They are not allowed to settle down. If they settle down, their settlements are essentially marginalized. There is no electricity, there is no sanitation, and so this is the story of the Romani people. There are many of them in Romania. That's why there is this misconception and confusion between Romani and Romanian. So the Romani people are people of Indian origin. They have converted to various religions, either Islam or Christianity, just to survive, but they still practice as much of their original indigenous culture as they can. Their customs are very different. There is this goddess in France. She is called Kali Sara, and she is supposed to be a representation of the Christian Virgin Mary, but she is dark in color. And every year she is given a ritual uh, immersion into the sea. So it is essentially the worship of goddess Kali in the guise of a Christian goddess or a Christian, it's given a Christian identity. So that is how they try to still, in some form or the other, cherish their own culture. So these are our people. These are the people who are the sons and daughters of India. And so that's in brief about the Romani people. There are some good resources online that you can look up and you can learn more about them.